in nature. And so the idea was, well, can we make the building more a part of nature? And that's where the idea of the nest and the bird's nest came from, that it's one of the most sort of elegant structures around in terms of how it's built, and that it is a home. And that was sort of the idea that we came through from the very beginning to create. It's actually 3 structures, the train station for the zoo train, the education center building, which also has the insect zoo in it, and the classroom building for the zoo camp. The other unique thing about this building, of all the buildings out there, this building actually gets, I think they just calculated it got about 1.2 million visitors last year. So it's a little building, but it's getting a lot. They get about 1.6 million visitors a year through the zoo, and they've been sort of doing calcs on how many go through. So it's a very well-traveled building. So that's another way in which even a small building can make a difference. Do you want to flip? Yeah, you just. So one of the themes that came out of this was the idea of small things matter. And that was the driving force of both the building, but also the exhibits and the communication within it. And that's that every individual can make an impact on the planet and the environment through the individual actions we take. And that theme also came into, we had a great collaboration with Rob Lay, a sculptor and designer out of Los Angeles, who did this sculpture called Ambiguous. And it in some ways reflects a lot about the thinking that there's beauty in everything in nature, there's structure, and if you get a chance, go on to Rob Lay's site. He took a lot of videos of this in different climates, like when rain's coming off of it, and that was his idea. How can we create a sculpture that is man-made but also connects to nature in an emotional way that takes you in? And of course the kids all look at it and they all have different ideas about what it is too. So it's a real simple building. Well, not simple in shape, but simple in terms of plan. The number one is the nest, which is the exhibit space. There's a large conferencing center, and that was another part of the idea. The zoo wanted to become the hub for environmental action, I guess, in the metro area. And so they wanted a space that was open actually after hours, so this building could be accessed from the outside of the zoo for a lot of different groups to meet and have events. And it's been very, very successful for them in that way. And then the other building are a series of classrooms, anywhere from pre-K through 6th grade. And that's about 650,000 kids or something a year through. It's like the numbers are just off the chart of the number of kids that go through the zoo. So it's an amazing opportunity to do this kind of teaching and learning. And one of the parts of that integrated process is that the zoo teens, of which there are, I think, maybe about 600 of them or so every year, are really involved in all aspects of the zoo. And there's actually 3 different zoo volunteer programs. We had them come into our studio and do a day workshop on designing their space. They were literally working out of a closet in a basement before this building, and they were really, and they're from all over the Portland metro area, and giving them a home. And I think this is something that was important to the zoo, is investing in kids, because the kids are our future. And if they weren't given a home, given the sort of sense of home and importance, then what are we saying? So they ended up with, actually the next slide there, which is a very cool space, is their own home. It's where up to 70, every week about 70 of the volunteers get together and plan out their week, and all the staff are there as well. So those that do come on the tour will be seeing all that space tomorrow.
And then also tying into design for community, there are about, I think there are 20 different stakeholder groups at least of other organizations that had similar missions to the zoo. And they were very influential in some of the exhibits that went into this space. This particular view that you see has to do with the Heroes for Wildlife. Those are local heroes in Portland who have taken the initiative to do something that makes a big difference in the ecology or sustainability around the city. One of my favorite ones is the frog taxi, where there are native frogs that every year try to migrate from the park across a highway, a couple of railroad tracks, and busy roads to get to their mating grounds, and then they try to make the journey back. So every year now, 90 people plus come out in the pouring rain with their buckets, and they help carry the frogs across to the mating grounds and then carry them back when they're done. So the next measure is design for ecology. Typically when we're looking at with the way COTE's looking at this, it really has to do with the looking at the site. And the zoo certainly did a great job with making sure that all of the plants were zero-escaping plants. We have bioswales, we have hands-on gardening. You can actually learn how to restore the habitat in your own backyard and get a certificate from the Audubon Society. But it's also about ecology in a bigger way as well. Insects have such an important job in our ecosystem. They have ecosystem services that we rely on, but they're not appreciated a lot. And so really raising the respect for small creatures like insects. There's also a turtle lab where the baby western turtles, I think they're the western turtles. Pond turtle, yeah. So they're about the size of a Cheez-It when they first hatch, and you can see them in all their sizes until they get big enough to return to nature. Then design for water. So water, the flow of water and respect for water is really prevalent in the design of the project. You can see the flow in the grounds themselves as it flows through the rain water gardens and are cleansed and through the site. We also collect water. As you probably know, it rains a lot in Portland. But unfortunately, it doesn't rain so much in the summertime, which is when the zoo is most visited. And there are 27 urinals and toilets in that bathroom, which serves the entire west side of the zoo. And so when we were talking about rainwater collection, we thought, well, how does that make sense if we can't flush the toilets with the water in the summertime? Turns out that this site has nuisance groundwater that runs underneath the site, and for over 50 years they've been putting a lot of energy into pumping it away so that basically the whole side of the zoo doesn't slide down onto the highway. And so now we're able to divert that water into the tanks in the summertime, keep them full, and use less energy overall too. So design for economy. This is kind of a fun story. So originally the program called for 6 classrooms in the classroom wing when we were looking at a constrained budget, but then also thinking about ways to reduce our energy use and embodied carbon. We came up with the idea that, well, what if we only build 4 classrooms and provide 2 platforms where they can have seasonal tents instead? Turns out that those safari tents are now the most popular ones with the camp kids, and so they're in high demand every summer. And that move saved over 82,000 pounds of embodied carbon, as well as saving 1,600 square feet of interior space. And then designing for energy. So the project didn't start off with a goal for net zero energy. In fact, there was a requirement by the city of Portland and Metro, actually, that there be a large green roof. But when we started going through our EcoShrep process and talking about living building challenges, one of the frameworks we wanted to look towards. The idea of net zero and this idea that you can really use what you have in your place, and the concept of zero being something that's so much easier to understand than just being 80% better than baseline, became something that the zoo became really enamored with. And so we planned for it throughout the design process and even into construction, but they didn't have the funds for it, and the zoo continued to work very hard on getting the grants and the partnerships in place. And so finally, by the time we were through construction, we were able to achieve the amount of solar array that we needed. It's not an easy building to get the EUI down, though, because we have the cafe, which is very energy intensive. Things like the insect zoo and the turtle lab have to be very well controlled with the atmosphere and the temperature. And so looking towards other places like the classrooms and the larger exhibit space where we could rely on natural ventilation when it was right, using radiant slab in that big exhibit hall, were ways that we got the EU down so that we could accomplish that. And then going along with the concept of learning and making all of what we do on display as much as possible when it comes to sustainable systems in a building. The classrooms are equipped with green and red lights, and so what this does is it indicates to the students or the staff, the campers, when the conditions are right to use passive ventilation. And so when the green light comes on, they have a choice. They don't have to do it, but they can come over and switch the switch, which turns off the HVAC system, and then they can open up the big garage doors and the windows to let the passive ventilation work. Then the next measure is designing for wellness. And so connections to the outdoors, of course, is very important. We have all the corresponding outdoor spaces, but really being able to open up and connect to them as much as possible. I think what was great with the, we like to do as much as possible. It is our goal to do post-occupancy evaluations on every project. We don't always get to do that. Sometimes we do it to more or less of a degree, but going through the COTE Top 10 submission really gave us a great opportunity to push us forward in a way that maybe would have been pushed down the road otherwise. But what we learned from that survey was that the occupants were very satisfied with those connections to the outdoors and the connection with daylight and the quality of the air. Oh, one other thing, there's, we haven't mentioned the bird-friendly glass. I never go this far into the presentation without mentioning the bird-friendly glazing because it's such a big story. So every window in the center has bird-friendly glazing. You will see the stripes. You can kind of see it in this picture. You can see it better in others. And so that's to keep the birds from striking into the glass. If you're not familiar with that problem, actually more birds are predicted to die from that every year than the cats being outside problem. So it was a big deal to the zoo. And so, like I said, they're in every window despite the added cost. But it also elicits a kind of a neat biophilic response. Some people have compared it to looking through streaming rain. Other people have said it's kind of like being in a big clump of grass on the savannah, so you feel safe, but you're out looking out to the outdoors. And sometimes you can hear the lions roar, so it really, sometimes it's really nice to have that feeling of safety. And then design for change. This is really about resiliency. So when it comes to resilient design principles, you know, we can look at them at a building scale, at a community scale, or a regional scale. The building with the passive ventilation and the solar panels taking advantage of resources on site very much take into consideration those building scale resilient design principles. But I think the bigger story is really about the community scale and the fact that when we learn that all of those small actions that we take, they may be small person by person, but when we do that as a community, when our families are doing it, when our communities are doing it, we're really all doing it together, and that it's a lot less overwhelming when we do that together. And design for resources. So we already talked about the classrooms saving so much in embodied carbon. The big emphasis on local FSC wood, not just FSC, but making sure that it was local as well. Doing things that we all know are just really smart to do. I think everyone in this room wouldn't be surprised to learn that we used slabs as not only the structure, but the finished floor, also as a great thermal mass, avoiding drop ceilings overhead, exposing the structure. Probably the most beautiful story, though, is the 60-foot-long mural from the 50s that Willard Martin created. It stood in this exact spot for a very long time, and then was in storage in a warehouse. And so now it's returned at the entry. Everyone can see it as they enter into the zoo, and creates kind of a gateway experience and honors that history of the zoo. And then the last one is design for discovery. When it comes to the COTE Top 10 measures, this is a pretty broad one. It is a lot about that post-occupancy evaluation. But I think one of the biggest stories for the education center is, again, that education piece of it and what anyone who visits it can discover. So you can see in the middle, there's a one kid peeking into the periscope where you can look onto the roof and see all of the PVs on the roof. There's a little girl peeking through the glass into the rainwater skid room, which cleans all that water for the to flush the toilets. The kids love to ask about the purple handles on the toilets, which indicates that they're the reused, reclaimed water. And then the post-occupancy evaluation itself, we overall discovered that people were talking to each other. 50% of the survey respondents said that they learned about some of the sustainable aspects from somebody else that they talked to. So we thought that just opening up that conversation was a really good success story. We learned that while they were aware of the green light indicator in the classrooms, not as many had used it as we had hoped. So that's something that, we're always learning. We want to go back and figure out why. Might have been because there was a lot of smoke that summer. Could have been another reason. But overall, I think, oh wait, I've got 2 more slides. So right now, where are we? We are measuring for net zero now. So in February of 2020, if we achieve net zero, we'll be able to apply for the certification. So far, we're looking really good. So far we're ahead of our budget, but we're about to go into some of the darker, more dreary months. The good news is the zoo lights don't count against us. They're on a separate meter, so we don't have to. If you've ever been to the zoo at Christmas, they light up the whole thing like a Christmas tree. So, yeah. So that's basically a nutshell. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Somehow it comes out. Push it. Yes, tension.
Ah, there we go. Success. So that was great. Congratulations on a fantastic project. And I really appreciate you going through that with the 10 measures. I think that ties nicely to where we started this morning, talking about the framework for design excellence that's been adopted by the AIA. This is a really great example of how a practice within your own ranks, but also, most importantly, working with your client. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you began that process with them, if you talked about the 10 measures at the beginning of design, or were doing it in the background and then shared it, or how you did that.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting because I think we had to be LEED silver, I think is what they said. And we did just recently get LEED platinum. So
you knocked that one out of the park. Good for you.
So they had done a lot of work in a master plan about sustainability as part of their master plan, but specifically for the building, the charge wasn't, they weren't focused on it that much actually in terms of how the building would be even net zero. We actually brought that to the table. We actually did, and Heather and I did a presentation about different certification systems, and we did a presentation on the Living Building Challenge, which they just got totally fascinated with, and that sort of set them off thinking. We did not end up going through that route exactly, other than through the net zero certification process. But I think it was more, I think that's where, as architects, we can bring things forward to clients that are completely interested. They're just not, that's not part of their business. Right. The zoo is the education department is educating, that they had never heard. They didn't even exactly know what LEED was, so it was a lot of education on our part to them.
I think that's a really good message, and a takeaway for today is that we really can be advocates in a whole bunch of different ways professionally. So I think this is a really great example of taking someone from, maybe silver to net zero and platinum. We joke about it being sort of the guerrilla approach, just kind of sneaking it in. We've been doing that for 25 years. And then, of course, at the end, you've really succeeded when they think, wow, wasn't that a great idea we all had? So it's a good thing.
They were like on pins and needles on the LEED platinum, and they became very educated in calling us about, are we getting that point? Are we not? And, so it ended up being.
Well, I was going to say that one of the takeaways here is that we're all educators. We don't stop being educators, and it's something we do every day. I had a question about what you showed, that really lovely metaphor of the nest, And I sort of, in the theme of integrated design that we've been talking about today, I wonder, how did you see any connection between the sort of poetic metaphor and opportunities for a sort of the link to the performative aspect of it?
Well, one of the thoughts that came to me in the early design part was that the nest is like one of the most efficient structures that has no connections really other than weaving. And we were faced with a site that we were trying to break these boundaries and weave things together. So it actually started with the word weaving, and then when I started kind of thinking about weaving, sort of the nest came up, and so then it was really about, so how can we create that sense of what's a home? All animals have homes. So that was actually and if you visit the zoo, which we spent a lot of time doing, there's a lot of discussion about animals' homes, and that's habitat, homes and habitat. In fact, if you go to the zoo, they talk much more about habitat. That's the word they use more than sustainability. So where do animals live, and how do they survive in their different habitats? And so that's kind of where that came from.
I had a question about behavior change, which I think is one of the things that all of us are going to be dealing with in the next several years. How can we make projects like this are so great as examples of how all these things can come together and be a wonderful environment to be in and perform beautifully and look fantastic, and then share those great stories about habitat. And but the behavior change, I love the green light indicator, and oh darn, it didn't work quite as good as you thought. We've tried things like that in our work, and it's always a challenge. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe some of the things that you tried to put into this project, and ideas you have about how those sorts of behavior changes could be more impactful.
Well, this is actually something that's really fascinating to me, the idea of behavior change. And if I could take a detour, that might be okay. So
Absolutely, we're doing this freeform thing. Remember,
great.
we're just winging it here.
We are so fascinated with this because we do know that occupants. So behavior change, in our everyday lives, our everyday actions, but then also in these projects that we're putting so much effort into. To be sustainable projects, but to also encourage occupants to interact with them, and how far do we take it? Do we completely automate it, or do we actually encourage that interaction? And so working with PSU, we've actually, on their research class, we've done a couple of research projects around new technology and how maybe that can come into play. And so we did a whole game based on virtual reality. I know Alan's been through it. It's a pretty fun game. So in this game, and it's based on a multi-occupant classroom space, which are some of the hardest to get someone to take ownership of. But it also has students coming through it, and different students every year, so you can touch a lot of people. And so in this particular game, you are actually the air conditioner, and you're supposed to build empathy for the air conditioner because it has to work so hard. And so in this, you come in this classroom when the heat's pouring into the window from this direct sun it's gaining, and there's a thermostat on the wall, and you have to get the temperature down to a certain temperature, but you can't blow your energy budget. And so you physically, you're having to swing your arms around, and of course everyone looks really silly when they're doing it, but no one cares when you have the goggles on. And you have to slowly discover all of the passive strategies in the room. You have to pull down the shades and open the right windows to get cross ventilation. And turn on the fans, that sort of thing. And so that's just one experiment that we've met. Having a son who's in middle school and just knowing that VR, augmented reality, they're all technologies that are they're here to stay. So how can we embrace those as architects beyond visualization, which are a great tool for too, but how can we take it to that next level as well?
Yeah, I think that's where these buildings, and we all know they work or don't work based on the occupants' way of working with them. So at the zoo, one of the big strategies for the big exhibit space was a big folding glass wall on nice days that could open up. And they've had a lot of issues with that because weather changes in Oregon on and off, and who is going to actually close it is one thing to close the smaller classrooms, but that big, and what they found was, interestingly, they're very keen on their net zero budget. So the director was noticing that they were sort of like each keen up on their budget, and he said, and they realized it was because this big door was open. It was very welcoming. People flowed in and out, which was the whole idea. But at the same time, the staff was keeping it open because it was so successful as a way to bring people in. But when it got colder or open too early in the morning or too late in the evening, that they were using more energy for the space, or in the summer when it got too hot, they were having to condition the space. So it was really interesting that this ownership of the control of a space has to be really thought about.
Oh, that's great.
I was interested in the fact that you say that you've been doing post-occupancy evaluation on all your projects, and I think that's really great. How can you talk a little bit more about that? This is a great case study, but I think it's sometimes it's the ones that aren't so perfect that that are harder to convince the clients to do that. And then how does that feedback loop kind of work back into your other projects?
That's a great question. So we don't get paid for them yet.
That's a shared issue.
Yes, yes, it is. It's a hard part, and I think we're starting to look at how maybe we write that into contracts or at least save some of the fee for that. But at this point, it's all been because we want to learn, and I have to say, LEED continues to help with that. I know sometimes LEED is not very well loved, but there are opportunities it gives you. You have to go back and do a thermal comfort survey. Why not make it a much more well-rounded survey where you're really looking into have we achieved what we set out to do during the design in so many other ways.
And how do you share that information with your staff? How many people are in your office? We didn't.
We
really
have
talk
about, I think, 57 or 58.
That's okay.
And we do a lot of, one is Heather does a lot of presentations to the staff about the different projects as they're going along, and we have our own design reviews. But the post-occupancy, I think, is mainly just distributed through, we post most of those on our website as well. And we share them with the clients. I think that's the important part, is that they really see it. And it's interesting, normally when we put them out, we did a re-college here, Performing Arts building, and very successful project. But as in every building, there are issues with, and it has a lot of natural ventilation, but it's a big theater building, so it also has a lot of heat loads and other things. And in that, we did find, and sometimes these POEs tend to happen a little bit later, past even the typical warranty period time on mechanical systems by the time we get them all done. And the building's actually up and running, which is often takes a year to get that done. And so we don't want to do it until we really think the building's straight. And then on that building, we found that there were still issues even like 2 years after the building opened. And it was good because in an interesting way, from a professional standpoint, it allowed us to go back and actually go back to the college and say, hey, there is this issue. Because often I think occupants don't feel that they're heard. They probably throw in a complaint to the facilities and say, it's too hot in my office, and somebody just says, okay, whatever. And when we did the survey, we were able to see through that there was some consistency in some of the issues that were coming up, which was interesting because we had a whole bunch that said, it was actually pretty funny because we find actually the best part is where people handwrite in their comments at the end. And we had a couple that were, it's like the Arctic in my office. And then we had someone else literally different part of the building say it's like the Sahara. So we kind of like, that was pretty funny. And we're like, did they talk to each other or was it just, but apparently the building was, the way it was balancing out between the natural ventilation and the air conditioned part wasn't quite working out. So that's where I think it is for all of us to learn. And I don't think we have a good feedback loop between occupants in general and that people complain and there's nowhere that goes.
I think that brings up a really interesting question about not just user behavior, but user expectation, and how our thermal comfort expectations have shrunken down to about 3 degrees one way or the other, from what maybe it used to be, 150 years ago. So, I think that's why the POEs are always tough, because you're sort of asking people. Sometimes you're asking people, are you comfortable? But they're thinking about comfort in terms of, well, yeah, I'm not comfortable because it's not always 68 degrees, when in fact the building has other aspirations.
Well, so one of the, I think, opportunities we found with POEs is doing some education, and so we've actually on some of the projects, Reed was one of them, where some of the spaces are supposed to have higher thresholds and allow for adaptive thermal comfort. We'll ask them about how they feel about the thermal comfort, and then we say, oh, and did you know this is passively heated or cooled, and does knowing that, we actually asked them, does knowing that make you feel more friendly towards how you feel about the thermal comfort? And most of the people said, yeah, sure.
I've always thought it's ironic that in really hot climates, people don't think twice about bringing a jacket into a overly air-conditioned building in the summer, but in a cold climate, people get really angry if you got to bring a sweater or a jacket in
Exactly.
to stay warm in the.
Yeah. I'd like to know a little bit. This is a fantastic project, but I know you guys do a wide range of other kinds of projects, and I'd love to know how you've integrated the 10 measures in those projects, and what you found to be successful. In our work, the affordable housing and supportive housing projects are, really challenging with their budgets, and having them get LEED certification, for example, they would much rather put that money into the programs for the populations that they deal with. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, with the range of clients that you work with, you have managed to integrate these ideas of integrated design.
So intentionally integrating the 10 measures is something we're just starting to do. And in fact, I'm going to call her out. Where's Kelly? Kelly, can you wave? Kelly's doing a lot of work on this in our office. And so we are now very intentionally, with every project, our goal is to use the top 10 measures with the new super spreadsheet.
Do you like it?
We love it.
I'm going to tell
Yes.
Corey that we got a winner.
Well, we're changing it.
We're changing it, yes.
That's
in a
guaranteed.
Good way. We're adding to it. And we're actually, Kelly and I had a call with Helena, who's one of the co-authors, and had some ideas, some that would work nationally, and then some that would be more regional for Portland, and had a great conversation with her. Yeah, so we're super excited about it. And so we are just, like I said, intentionally doing that on projects. We started that about 3 or 4 months ago. So we're really excited, because I think, like every architecture firm, we all struggle with, if a project's not doing LEED or some other certification program, how do you make sure that you're hitting all of the different categories on every project, and talking to every owner about it? And so now we have this great framework to do that.
So one thing I'd add that we found to be really successful is not only within our own ranks and with our particular client, but on community-based project design that we do. It's a really understandable way to run different public charrettes and meetings, and it's a really great way to divide up a group and have them think comprehensively about their community, their place, what drivers they have in their community, whether it's health and wellness or water. So I think it's a great tool, not just within our own practice and with our individual clients, but with the greater community. So
Yeah, I think maybe everybody knows, but the new the super spreadsheet and those top 10 measures in the way they're explained, I think, really push beyond. They're somewhere between, I guess, living building and the original LEED kind of thing. So they really hit those issues, which we find actually the avenue through wellness now seems to be one of the primary areas that people, the general public, I think everybody's aware of the energy, and somehow they kind of think as architects we're solving that problem. On the other hand, maybe they're suspicious about us solving the wellness problems, like, are you going to put us in a building that doesn't have fresh air or other things? So in some ways, the wellness and other community aspects of that spreadsheet, going beyond the metrics or the energy measures, is a real benefit of that as a way to look more cohesively about the way buildings and community environment work together.
And we found health to be just an amazingly democratic way to talk about design. It's not a political issue at all. It doesn't have the fear factor of, oh my God, they're going to make me uncomfortable. So it's a really, really good way to open up a conversation with people who don't deal with this topic all the time, because everybody has, someone who's had asthma or, different kinds of allergies. It just cuts across everything. So it's a really good entry point for a conversation.
Are there any sort of integrated design stories with your consultants that you've
Consultants, let's talk about
haven't
them.
shared with us yet about early, especially early phase, or getting them on board and all that?
Fortunately, I guess, we're in Oregon, we're in Portland. We have, between particularly in the MEP world, we have some great consultants that are all, real leaders in our own building, just over on 17th and Lovejoy. We did with Interface, 17 years ago. I think the first cooled radiant slab probably maybe in the US, I don't know, and basically experimented on ourselves and with them. So we've got great consultants to work with that really help us. I think we also do work regionally on the western states, and so we do a lot of work in Idaho and other places where perhaps you don't have that same level of knowledge, but I can tell you everywhere we go, the consultants are interested, so we actually find that they want to know more about how these systems can work and how they've been successful, and how we can show them buildings where they are successful to demonstrate to their clients that it isn't an add-on. I think, the integrated design, we keep talking about it. We don't like to it's not something you put on, and I think there are certainly parts of the country where it's still seen as sustainable things are, you have a building and then you sort of stick things on it.
Green bling.
Green, that's it, yes.
So I love it. So now we're teaching the consultants about their own.
It's something like that, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Lots of teaching.
So one thing I can share is another great strategy that works with clients is competition. And we do a lot of education work, and it was really great at a recent interview to see their eyes light up when we had a way of tracking how their competitors were doing on energy and other sorts of things. And competition, it works in America really well.
Well, I think, we do a lot of, majority of our work is in education, probably 80% or more. And in over the last probably 5 or 6 years, it's moved from a lot of higher education to a lot of K-12 work. And it's interesting because I think all these educators are interested in how the buildings can help and their environments reflect what they're trying to teach. And so we have a great audience for that. Sometimes if we go into a workshop, like you say, with teachers and everybody's on board, it's getting up to the administrative level or the decision-making level where it's still a push at times, or we don't want to pay for the plaque, those kind of things that people say. And so that's one of the reasons actually we jumped on this super spreadsheet so fast, is because we wanted to put something in front of them that they didn't have to buy the plaque, because it's like, hey, we got something, you don't have to buy the plaque. But we would like you to do this energy modeling, and we would like you to do these things to show that it works. And it seems to do the same kind of thing and receptive to that.
That's great, really great feedback. Well, speaking of audience, I think, Allison, we have till 10 till, is that correct? Or something like that, a little before 5. So there hasn't been too much time at all. This has been such an action-packed day. There hasn't been too much time for questions from the audience, so should we allow people?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to allow some time for people to ask questions or comments. Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. Net zero energy, net zero water provide the design team real clarity and compelling standard. And so, and as you And as you've described, it also elevates the user's responsibility and awareness of their energy use. So that's all good. But I'm wondering, in your work, what are your thoughts on what's the appropriate scale for a power plant or a water supply system or a waste treatment system? And should it be the scale of a building?
Who wants to take that one? I'm a moderator, right?
Oh, boy.
That's right. I don't know if we've had that opportunity to talk about that a lot with our projects and clients. It does seem to me that the more you can scale up a little bit, the more economies you get from that, and that does seem to make more sense. I mean, the building by building model, I think we couldn't do that every building. So I think looking at like the Haslow on 8th, if you're familiar with that project here, where it really was like 4 city blocks or something like that, where they looked at it on a more neighborhood scale. It starts to make a lot more sense. It really worked more like nature. I mean, nature doesn't have these little tiny, boundaries drawn around it. We really are all connected in a bigger way.
Absolutely. I was just reminded of a funny story when Marsha and I were when the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco was going up, this gigantic beast in the city. And we're driving down Market Street once, and there it was, this huge thing, and the only thing I could think of was, where's all that poop going to go? and so, really, to their credit, I mean, I guess they have the money and they have the scale. They turned an entire parking garage floor into a giant, where they are turning an entire parking garage floor into a giant black water treatment system. But not every building can do that. So I think the idea of regional treatment has been
You bring up a really good point, particularly in a dense city like San Francisco. It's a huge issue. The affordable housing projects that we work on, there's just not enough roof area to really make it work within the property lines of our buildings. So as we mentioned earlier this morning, we're really interested in having these impacts beyond the property line of one building.
And it's all about balance, right?
Balancing it out.
Yeah.
So as that Salesforce building, which is huge, came in, I was working on a project at the bottom of the hill by the bay's edge, and everybody along the street is getting shit in their buildings. I mean, it's just like excuse me, I shouldn't say that. It's a big problem. Talk about post-occupancy problems, like, oh my goodness, look what's going on. But the city infrastructure, our cities do not have the money to adapt and address and rebuild for all this equivalent of Salesforce towers that are going in our town. And so what are we going to do? We're going to have to get a lot smarter. So taking the burden off the grid, through renewables, getting black water plants like Bill mentioned that Salesforce can afford to do. Hopefully there'll be other innovations that will allow our cities to still thrive and densify and build upon the transportation networks that are going to be so important for the future livability of our city. But you hit on a really hard point. We can't do this building by building. We have to think of it more systemic. Well, that was a hard one.
Anyone else?
Anybody got a softball here?
All right.
So as the token practice person on the organizing committee for this conference, I'd like to hear you guys talk about there's a problem, at least in the Bay Area where I'm also from, about getting workforce, like getting prepared people. And so what are you looking for from students coming out of school? How are they best prepared, and how can academia help with that pipeline problem that we have?
For workforce housing and the relationship?
Just for the workforce in our firms.
Oh, the work, I'm sorry, I'm going right to workforce housing. Okay.
Well, I think it is an issue getting staff right now anywhere, and so I think we in our firm, because we're studio based where everybody's kind of involved in all follow projects from beginning to end. We're looking for very well-rounded architects, really, or people that will be able to find their way to become that. I think that the technical aspect We don't have like a technical department and a design department or anything like that. So we are looking for students that really understand how buildings go together, if at all possible, because that's a very real part of when we talk about high performance buildings. That's where a lot of it is. It is actually in the way they're built. So, and then the work we're doing, we do, of course, everything in BIM and Revit and all that stuff. So that's a part of it, and it's more than that, because as I think maybe Heather mentioned, a lot of the other programs, I don't know if just talking about some of the other programs we use in terms of modeling and.
Yeah, so we, we're exploring more and more tools for analysis, and it's taken a number of different students or people who came with a little bit of experience, and then we had to build it within the office. And so using programs like Tally, the different daylight analysis tools, is it Diva and Rhino, or is it Safera? Now there's Cove tool for just doing basic energy modeling. We're really, every day I think how fortunate I am to have a position like I do at this firm the size of Opsis, and now Kelly is also dedicated half-time as well, which has been absolutely amazing. But every team needs to carry the sustainability initiatives and goals forward. We can't be on every team and be experts. We get the conversation started, we help, but it's really important that every team within the office is able to do some of that work themselves.
We have competing microphones. Someone asked me here today what we were looking for in students graduating looking for work, and I think I said, where'd she go? Fire in the belly, passion, commitment, and wanting to jump in, fully. I think in addition to that, there's an incredible opportunity for the new graduating people looking for work, that you have this incredible potential to bring things to your future employers. And we always look for people who have a new idea about how to use Tally in an interesting way, so there's a real power in this next generation of architects to be incredibly valuable to practitioners across the country who are going to have to be accelerating what they do very rapidly. So I think the students are in a really, really good position, because there's not very many coming out, and there's a huge demand right now, so it's definitely the students' marketplace. And they do have this opportunity to really accelerate what's happening in firms and take a leadership position in that.
I think, if you look back at the most of the firms that have won multiple COTE Top 10 awards, they tend to be in the 20 to 100 person range by and large, and they tend to do exactly what we're talking about. They're firms that attract architects who want to be well-rounded, who want to be good designers and good technicians, and be able to do it all. And so one could make a good case for the fact that what we're looking for now is what we've always looked for. As Marsha says, people with fire in their belly and a passion, but also recognizing that the stream of technology can be so overwhelming that we also need folks who have a healthy skepticism about the latest, shiniest technology, so that we don't waste a lot of time jumping down rabbit holes that don't prove to be useful. I think there was another sort of interesting theme happening here about just how do you manage the flow of this constant information flow that's happening. I used to think we were sort of keeping up, kind of like this, but now it feels like it's kind of getting away from us a little bit, and we have to figure out how to bring that back in.
And one of the comments this morning about teaching students critical thinking, that really resonated with me. And I think that is one of the most valuable things that can be given to students. Call it skepticism. That's also balanced with openness, to be aware of, what what potentials and what connections might be made, but critically thinking about just this rush of information that we're being hit with from so many sources now. There's just the filtering process is exhausting, combined with the overarching sense of urgency that we're faced with right now. It's an interesting challenge, but the next generation really is in the driver's seat and could really provide great innovation.
Anybody else?
Other questions? Yes.
What was the most difficult trade-off that you've had to do recently? You could talk about this. I was curious what the most difficult trade-off you had recently. I was thinking about the zoo project, and I was thinking, well, it's pretty spread out. Would it, if it were more compact, for example, maybe it could be more efficient, less envelope, those kinds of things. But maybe there are other kinds of trade-offs that you are facing that are at a bigger scale. It's just a general question.
I think that's every design decision, every single minute is sort of a this or a that. So I think as we go through every project, we're looking to kind of maximize the opportunity that happens to be there, whatever, if that's the site. If you actually saw the site boundary and property lines and no go, don't go, fire lanes on the zoo, it actually, and if you go out and look at the model out in the lobby, it's basically a line. It's 6 inches around every piece of that building. There's pieces carved away for it for the plaza, but that was the site. And so it is the most compact form to fit the site we had. It's interesting, I think, on that project in particular, it was budget driven. That's actually an interesting thing I think we haven't really talked about here, but all of our projects pretty much, we have some private university projects, but most of them, even those, are public projects. And so if you're going to do this level of sustainability, you have to figure out how to do it within the budget. So the budget we had for the zoo was derived in a bond program. Somebody came up out of the mid-air. I don't know how they came up with the number. They just came up with a number and said, here it is, and here's what you got to do. We did, though, convince them to do 2 tents, which was about $350,000. And I remember presenting that for the first time, because they'd actually had some tents. It was the worst thing, because they came to us, they said, we're so bad, we don't have classrooms. We have to have classes in tents. And they showed them to us, and I'm like, wow, I'd like to go to that class. But they were hot. They were actually tents on pavement. So they had put these safari tents out on the blacktop at the zoo, actually almost right close to where the building is now. And so that just went in the back of our heads, and then we were in the value engineering. Some good contractor just told me he has another term, vulture engineering, which I thought was good, which is eating away at the project. And so we came up and said, well, what if we created these platforms in the air? So they actually are wood platforms, so the air is underneath them. And wouldn't that be great? Because then you could use it for parties and rent it out as a deck outside overlooking the zoo. And then that kind of caught their attention, and the fact it was going to save about $350,000. So I think, just have to be creative and imaginative to take a compromise and try and figure out how it works. And as Heather said, that is now, they originally thought they were going to put the youngest kids in the tent because they didn't know better. But it turns out now they flipped that right away, because everyone's like, can we get in the tent? So you actually have to work your way up. And I think it's not till 5th grade or something that you can get a class in the tent.
Any other questions for any of us? Okay. Well, thank you all for your attention. It's been a really great day. Allison, do you want to?
So can I add one thing here, because I see John standing up there. I think to be here today is really special, and I wouldn't be here if I hadn't signed up for a class, something called ECS, Environmental Control Systems. I thought I was signing up for something like knobs and dials and everything, and I wasn't actually that interested in it because it sounded like air conditioning systems or something. But we had to take it. But John, I think, flipped a lot of the world upside down, and I was fortunate to be in that class. And I think probably just about maybe the first year that the book came out, the manual came out that had chapters that had been inserted, I guess, surreptitiously, showing how sun shading works and daylighting works. And that really started my career and thinking about sustainability. And really the birth of Opsis was always based on the idea of sustainability and design excellence are really two things combined. There's no boundary between those. So I really thank you, John.
Thank you, Alec. So we have some announcements to make and then a discussion about future symposia. So I'd like to start off with thanking the people who helped make this happen and the people who provided money. The Society of Building Science Educators, for example. Would the board members of the SBSE please stand so people can see you? So that was Ulrika Passe, the president, our treasurer, Tom Collins, and our secretary, Emily McGlone. Of the Department of Architecture of the University of Oregon, the Jeffrey Cook Memorial Trust, which brought us our wonderful speaker from Namibia, our organizing committee, and 25 external reviewers who went through a lot more abstracts than the papers you heard here today. So. And I really want to thank Allison Kwok and Isabel Rivera in particular, and our wonderful student volunteers. Yes.
So I really don't like microphones. If you can hear me in the back, I think. Yes. Okay. The original idea on the part of the organizing committee was that we would sort of do a retrospective of what we heard over the last day and evening. But it seems not so useful, I think, to look in the rearview mirror at something we just passed, no matter how enjoyable that was and no matter how wonderful it was. It seems more important to us collectively, perhaps, to look through the front windshield. And so what we'd like to do is, I think, just open it up for a limited amount of discussion. How do we capture the energy, the imperative that we've heard about to make change, to do the little bit that we can do individually and to marshal that collectively? Ideas for moving forward. As you heard, there'll be a Reynolds Symposium in a year, give or take. It will focus on alto. That's wonderful, but it's not necessarily a direct continuation of the focus that we've had here this weekend. So how do we continue what's been started here? How do we continue catalyzing collectively what the University of Oregon has done for decades and what John has done for decades and what the organizing committee has done on somewhat of a shorter term basis? Ideas, thoughts, speculation. Or do we just sort of say, that was really great. I'll see you in a year. Nancy? Yes.
Okay, I heard this podcast that was about how mathematics taught in high school these days is basically a direct outcome of the Sputnik program and how we're still teaching exactly what was needed at that time. And it's haunting me because, you know, this horrible idea that students are not getting the kind of Excel and statistics data analysis that they need, but instead are learning about advanced algebra and the trajectory needed to get a rocket into space, you know, it's a little outmoded. So what's the corollary for us now? And I'm wondering whether there could be a way that we put forth some sort of model curriculum or something. I mean, when there's a new kind of field, there's always this need for
some model for people to know what to do next. And this has happened when there was like, you know, computer graphics, AI, that there's a multimedia, that some group of educators gets together and looks at best practices and makes some recommendations. So maybe we don't have all the answers, but there's some really great things that I saw in the sessions I attended, and perhaps there could be some sort of statement that could be more than what we have at the NAAB at the moment, that could be a guidance through ACSA.
Well, I still think we should support the COTE committee, the Committee on the Environment, in providing feedback to the new NAAB accreditation criteria, because I think that there were some rewordings in the last, from draft 0 to draft 1, but I don't think everything has been achieved. And I think it's amazing what you've achieved on the AIA convention, and I think we as educators have to follow suit, because suddenly you are leading and we are following, and I think we should we should really support you more.
Could we get an agile volunteer to move the mic around the room? Great.
Just to add to that, I want to say what an inspiring day this has been for us. And one really close in, I guess looking out the windshield item to do is write NAB. You know, we've got till November 22nd, I think. So if everyone here, so say there was a memo that was put forward from this collection of educators from all across the country that came together for this time frame, and that if you came up with a memo signed by everybody who attended, urging NAB to make structural changes in the accreditation process to integrate sustainable design in the studio and throughout all the curriculum. That's a very simple thing. It could be a one-paragraph memo, and just have all your powerful signatures on that. We have, this only happens every 6 years, is my understanding. So we don't have 6 years to waste. So we've got to do it. So that would be my task 1. In task 2, for those who are in the room who are practitioners, one of the things that we're working on in California is to make licensure renewal. In California, we have to take 5 learning units of ADA, you know, every time we get relicensed. Is that happening in Oregon also? Okay, well that happens in California. So their ADA and disability rights, absolutely imperative. But I would say that sustainability and climate change is absolutely the most important thing that our profession should be focused on. And so what a simple thing, just to have every person who claims to be a licensed architect anywhere across the country have to take learning units in order to get their license renewed. Because the AIA, as we know, is only 92,000 members. That's a lot of people. But there are a lot of people who practice architecture that don't engage with the AIA. So if we could make that structural change in what it is required to be a licensed architect, that would be huge. So those are my 2 asks.
We have a, thank you. We have a theme developing here, and that is, we've heard that it would be easier to move forward if we had more aggressive building codes, because then you're not defending going beyond code. You're designing to code and then still going beyond. You sneak stuff in as you can. You do what you can in the space you have. I'm very, very worried personally about NAB's proposed changes. To me, it pulls out the safety net that we might have right now. And I again, don't think any school would admit that our curriculum is designed to pass through an accreditation visit. But in many cases, schools don't go a whole lot beyond that. And I think in the future that doesn't have any NAB student performance criteria worth talking about, we could see some backsliding. So I really appreciate your mentioning that and kind of spurring us to action. Am I overstating the potential movement of NAB?
You looking at me? You know, you guys probably know a whole lot more about NAB, but my little quick study that in the tutorial I've been given by people who you know, in the world of the Committee on the Environment that deal with this daily, is that this is really an essential moment, and that as I mentioned this morning, Jane Frederick, the incoming AIA president, today made a presentation pushing this. And NAB answers to ACSA and AIA, as I understand it, that those are who their clients are in a way. And the students. So, and NCARB, correct. Yeah, but that's their client. So we need to make them make noise. So you guys have a very powerful voice and should figure out how to make noise.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So how soon can we do it?
Today.
You're talking about writing a paragraph? Yeah, I mean, can we sign it before we leave?
So that's how things get done. You just do it.
Bob's serious. Are you gonna draft it?
No, I mean, I mean, we're all in the room. It takes 15 minutes to write a paragraph, and we could all sign it before we got the door. The paragraph doesn't have to be very elaborate. It can just be a statement that sustainability should be a major element in NAB accreditation criteria, and that for the last 2 cycles of the NAB updates, it has regressed, because it used to be more explicit cycle before this past one. And what we have in hand now is watered down, and what's being proposed is less and more watering down. And some of that turns on, I mean, you have the 5 collateral organizations, but it's the personalities that run them that really makes the change. So that's where the issue is, I think. But if this group, before we left today, signed a thing, could be 1, 2 sentences, then that would be some progress in a response to what you just said. I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, we do have a focus on education at the symposium, and just for some of you aren't familiar with the process, as Bob mentioned, previously there was a student performance criterion labeled sustainability, and you had to show student work that was sustainable. Big, huge air quotes here. But at least you had to go through the process of saying, can I in good faith put this project up as indicative of what we do for sustainability? Someone had to go through that process.
You want the projector back up to write such paragraphs?
I couldn't hear what he said.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is great. That student performance criterion was removed, and in NAB's opinion, sustainability is elevated to a higher level.
Yeah.
But at that higher level, basically whoever put together the academic program report just wrote a narrative. And if you're in management, you don't write narratives saying how bad you are at sustainability. You just don't do that. So it becomes self-fulfilling. I'm worried that if we go even further, even that won't be there. I love having to put material on the wall that says, this is what our students know about structure. This is what they know about mechanical systems. This is what they know about sustainability. Okay.
Well, I think, you know, if you take it from the positive perspective, they're trying to make it more integrative. Because, of course, sustainability is not just something you check off the list as an add-on, as a, what did you say earlier, a green blimp, right? And I think that was one of the dangers of having it as a separate criteria. I think the term, as and we are going through 2021 through the accreditation, so we are one of the first guinea pigs, and we are working with the draft, which is evolving, right? So the challenge is that the term which is used now is environmental stewardship, and I think that derives directly from the AIA language, but I don't exactly know what that actually means in respect to how the student performance sort of responds to that concern. What they've changed significantly, or what they're about to change, is how student work is selected. And in the past, and you know, the educators know more about it than maybe the practitioners, there was high, medium, and low performance work selected by the program. And now the team will select project at random. So that means, I think from the perspective of the NAB accreditation board, they're trying to be more rigorous in how student work is assessed. But the work which is assessed is only assessed for integrative design. So how the narrative leads to that criteria is up to us as educators. And I think that is the potential and also the danger or challenge, right? Because it really depends on that conversation between the visiting team and the school or the university to make that narrative appealing towards our challenges as environmental stewards or stewards of the environment as designers. And I think I would love to see more specific description of what that actually is supposed to mean for the student work.
Would the AIA top 10 list for COTE be sufficient? If this group said that that should be demonstrated in all material that's displayed for accreditation, would that cover the base?
Well, if the AIA has just voted those top 10 criteria into design excellency, I think that's a good chance that that could fly, yes.
You already have explicit, you hear me? Yep. You already have explicit information in that list of 10 things. You've got 10 boards up there. Every year there's 10 projects. So if a school could demonstrate its 10 best or its 10 responses to that, I think it's my voice. I'll talk like Walter. If the AIA could direct its attention to those 10 criteria, then NAB could do the same, but we as schools could do the same. So we would evidence in a visit by an accrediting team that these are the ways in which we're addressing the 10 topics in studio and lecture and history and structures and ECS. For the sake of us that used to call it that. So.
Yeah, and we can't write a really cohesive moving paragraph a la Thomas Paine by committee in 10 minutes. But I think we can come to a sense of the group, hopefully. And we have a window of opportunity if we're silent, and that silence is read by someone as acquiescence, maybe, in the way we're moving. I would have profound guilt moving forward about that. So I don't know what the words will say, but I think this is a wonderful opportunity to say something as a sense of the group, the sense of the collective wisdom.
University of Oregon is also one of the guinea pigs. I don't know how to turn this on, so I'll just talk. After hours. Oh, okay. So basically, the main things that will be examined are two things: design synthesis and building integration. So the building integration, as Ulrika said, is that you have to get the building envelope, the structure, and the environmental control systems and life safety systems integrated. We could just say those are the only two ones that we have to have 100% of our student work collected for a lucky draw for inspection to see if we made it. And so we could just say there should be another student criteria that is about this related to the COTE top 10. It would be very, very simple. The other places where it comes in, as Walter said, it's kind of in the values. Environmental stewardship and professional responsibility is a narrative. And then in program criteria, you have ecological knowledge and responsibility, where you have to show your evidence in terms of the course materials, like the schedule of the course and the syllabi. It's only those two right now, student criteria 5 and 6, design synthesis and building integration, that you actually have to show student work. So it's turning into a little bit easier, like the engineers do it. And we could add this one, that something phrasing about sustainability that references the COTE top 10. That's what I suggest.
And there are 2 sign-up sheets going around. You're not signing away your children or your real estate or anything like that. All we're basically saying is, if you sign the sheet, do you agree in general concept with the document that's being prepared in real time here? So if you'll continue circulating this.
Can I add one suggestion to this as well? I think, we've gotten pretty used over the last few years to assembling letters to convince the recalcitrant AIA to do stuff. And we found that actually, you know, individuals is great, but it's even more powerful to have organizations, even in addition to individuals, sign these letters. So if we could get the Society of Building Science Educators to sign a letter as an institution, I know that National AIA Committee on the Environment would sign the letter. I think if you get other organizations to do that, and that can happen very quickly. So I would just suggest that that would be more powerful.
Well, the message has been sent to SPSC leadership, a large proportion of which is in the room. And this is not to exert undue peer pressure. I think people should reflect a little bit. Maybe it's an odd entity, but maybe the Reynolds Symposium could sign on as an organization of sorts. Individuals. None of us can speak for our universities. Most of you can't speak for your firms, but we still do have some collective power, I think. What were you saying?
Yeah, I think I've been a signature of the Iowa climate statement for the last few years, and we always have to say very clearly that we're signing these as individuals. And being in Iowa, where we currently have all the, you know, the the candidates coming through for the primaries, you know, there's a lot of pressure also in the institutions to not speak up for others. And so that has to be very clear, that you're talking only for yourself. And I think that whatever you sign here, and we have to agree that you're signing not for your institution, and there has to be a very strong disclaimer for that, because otherwise we get into big trouble.
We'll make that perfectly clear.
I would also add, I mean, these are all excellent points. I think if we really wanted to push it even further, you know, and I'm just reading over what the draft is saying, would be to move it up. Also, I mean, I agree with some of the details of what we're talking about here, but if we could push them to move up into the mission, part of the mission, if we feel it's this important, that the entire mission should be driven by the urgency of our need to address climate change. That right now the mission is very it's very generic.
Is that the mission of architectural education or NAB?
NAB is part one. It's context and mission, and it's very, it's about education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but it's very generic. I mean, if we could convince them to really move it up, then it's like an umbrella under which more detail would follow.
Sandy, can you pass the mic back?
One thing, I just completed the Track 2 Master's program at UO, and before that, I got my pre-professional degree on the East Coast. And in both those programs, I found, I understand with architecture, it is really important that we have a set of guidelines for what the education covers. But with that, I think it creates a system where architecture students in general become very contained to their department. And we are just kind of yelling into the echo chamber. And I think something that's really important, because there are a lot of aspects to sustainability that are going to change through the years. Obviously, there are a lot of passive methods that are here to stay, but there are a lot changing technology. But to really learn how to problem solve and how to work interdisciplinary, and not just with engineers and landscape architecture students, but to learn how to work with students who are going to be policymakers and educators, or work within these different social spheres, so that we can learn how to better serve those communities in a sustainable way, covering environmental sustainability as well as social sustainability. And I think that's something that isn't always learned in architectural education, just because there are so many other things that we're focusing on. But I think we're problem solvers by nature, and I think we do have the ability to lead more of these major social environmental issues than we currently are.
Jonathan? Jonathan, who is also on the SPSE board and is scholarship chair and gives away money to students and faculty. Needy students and faculty.
Please encourage your students to apply for scholarships. I wanted to suggest some wording, specific wording. I feel like it's really important that this letter communicate the affective tone of this room, the feeling of emotion and urgency that's been a theme of this entire conference, and I think that's been expressed in many different ways. But the language that I would suggest is something along the lines of this is critical to the continuing relevance, influence, and value of architecture as a profession that serves society. I think it's really critical that we communicate clearly why we want to send this letter, why we think it's important to change this, not
Say
just.
that one more time.
Sure. That this is critical to the continuing relevance, influence, and value of architecture as a profession that serves society. Yeah.
So we need to wrap this up. This is totally unfair on my part, but I've been given the signal, sort of. This is absolutely, I think, critical and important, but way too easy, because we're going to leave this room and go, oh yeah, we did something. We obviously need to do more, and so I don't know that we have the time right now to talk about this, but if there's a way to continue the conversation and discussion, things that were raised at the symposium that never got resolved. Several people asked, how do you do a really good integrated studio? And it's like, I don't know that we really have a fantastic exemplar out there for that. So, Allison, I'm going to leave that with you and John to maybe figure out if there's a vehicle to carry on the conversation.
I want to applaud what all of you contributed today. I'd also like to make another suggestion to put into the pot. Well, thanks. And that suggestion is to reach out beyond the borders of this country. There's a lot to learn from colleagues elsewhere in the Netherlands, in the UK. They are grappling with this too. And I think there can be some very fruitful exchange, and it can accelerate because they're dealing with this. Some countries have said, we are decarbonizing 95%. We are going to not net zero, but zero, or 95% zero. And that's really focusing the minds and getting people very focused, very worried, very anxious, and very driven, because we're actually very pleased that this is happening. So please connect with us in other parts of the world. Things you can learn from them, and they can learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoever has their hands up now.
The SBSE listserv is absolutely international, Richard. You know that.
Walter, I'd like to pick up a thread that was dropped earlier. A whole different venue for action. The notion of getting continuing education credits for re-renewal of architectural licensure. We need to go to our state boards and ask them for that. Do it collectively, do it individually. I'm going to start tomorrow.
So there's an opportunity to continue the conversation during the reception. Allison has.
If you want your HSW credits, please fill this out and I'll send it right away. Also, as that piece of paper goes around with your signature and maybe not your institution, I want you to also think about the kind of conversations that we're going to have over a great reception, but we'd like to continue it even later if you have energy, time, more brain power, at Nel Centro bar, cafe, garden, maybe not, it's raining, after this reception. So it's an informal after party. So
to wrap up the event in this room, I would like to thank you and have you thank yourselves. It's been a wonderful group, amazingly dynamic, brilliant, lots of really good ideas. So please,